Hey you guys, so I started off in part one. I think I did 14 minutes of talking about negative emotions. Now, because it cut off, I was not able to completely finish my live. So here I am making part two to negative emotions. So I think that it cut off where we were talking about pathways. So the first pathway is where you are in the awareness that you do have negative emotions in your shadow box or within your shadow aspect of yourself, but you choose to ignore it. And so because life works in ways of, always bringing you opportunities of, evolving your soul or becoming more aware of becoming more empowered of, your imprint on this realm, it's going to bring you opportunities where, you're going to have to bring your awareness to another level. So in the first pathway, you are in the awareness that you have negative emotions and you choose to ignore, or you probably don't have the time or whatever excuse or whatever you have you. So you choose not to deal with it. There's going to be an opportunity presented to you, and you're probably at some point going to feel that you are projecting your negative emotions onto the circumstance, the situation, the person. And so there's going to be two options given to you. Or you acknowledge that you're projecting and you do something about it, or you persist on not doing anything about it. Okay? So what happens is, in that occasion, in that second choice where you choose not to deal with it, it's going to be your ego stepping in, because it's no longer about the awareness. It's about being right? The ego wants to be seen as perfect and always right. So in most cases, it's going to fight its way into portraying or, showing yourself as not being in the wrong, right? So it's up to you. We live in a world of free will, okay? The second pathway is you are in the awareness that you have shadow, you have negative emotions, and you've dealt with them, you continue to deal with them, and you even created an outlet as to when you feel triggered, because opportunities are always going to present themselves to you as to how you resolve to negative emotions. Because you've created an outlet for it, you're in the awareness that you do have negative emotions. So whether an opportunity presents itself to you or not, you will put in place tools that you've developed as to how to resolve negative emotions, so that it does not become an overload in your shadow box or in your shadow aspect of yourself. That's how your shadow knows that it's heard. It's as well, it has its rightful place. Okay, so you deal with them constantly or whenever opportunities arises. And the third pathway is you do not have the awareness, probably because you grew up in an environment where it was forbidden to have emotions, express emotions, feel emotions, validate emotions, or even just negative emotions. Probably you were programmed very early on to feel positive emotions and to put those negative emotions in a bag. So when you were doing something wrong, you were probably told not to do something wrong or stop crying. All those were indicators that you were programmed a certain way to not validate those negative emotions. So you probably created a shadow box, or in your shadow aspect of yourself, you've accumulated a lot of negative emotions. So when you are not in the awareness and you grow up that way, what happens is you have not developed tools. So you're not in the awareness that you're doing this, but it became a habit. It became a pattern. So what happens is you are constantly projecting onto people. You're constantly blaming people for all that you're going through, because you're sensitive to negative emotions. When you get triggered to negative emotions, you just toss it in that shadow box. So you don't deal with them. You just deal with positive emotions. But negative emotions, because you were perceived or you were programmed to believe that negative emotions are bad, you just toss them in these shadow box or in the shadow aspect of yourself. And you go on into projecting onto other people your negative emotions. You don't take accountability or the blame because you do not have the awareness. And what ends up happening is you start developing those patterns or those behaviors as to your shadow self continues, right, to be triggered and to have these negative emotions. But the way in which you deal with them, your ego steps in. And because your ego always wants to be right, your ego is constantly going to fight external people or places and things and opportunities presenting themselves to you for you to deal with your negative emotions. And you're going to persist in being right. And your ego is going to constantly tell you, I'm right. So I'm projecting onto you, I'm right. I'm blaming you for all the things that's happening in my life. I'm right. Right? So that's going to be a conditioning. That's going to be a program. That's going to be a pattern until you accept that you have negative emotions. They are valid. They are legitimate. They need to be felt, right? Whether it's sadness, anger, frustration, grief, anxiety, stress, right? All these things are going to have to be recognized in order to properly deal with them. But in the case that you don't have the awareness, most of the time that's when the ego gets inflated, right? In defending the shadow, because the shadow has not gotten the awareness that those negative emotions are needs to be dealt with. So the shadow steps in constantly with projecting and manipulating external environments or people or situation and things. And then the ego steps in defending the shadow by saying, I'm right, you're wrong. And then that's when you develop narcissistic traits or narcissistic behavior. That's when you start manipulating others. That's when you start manipulating others for expressing and showing their emotions, their negative emotions. So what ends up happening is a dynamic where other healthy people around you are, has the awareness that they have negative emotions. They deal with them. But because you have not had the awareness or the tools to deal with them, you constantly project on them because they are expressing the negative emotions. And then because your ego stepped in and you have an inflated ego about your shadow aspect of yourself, you are constantly blaming them for everything that is wrong around you or for everything that you've went through or for everything that is not working for you. And then there's this dynamic where one is going to want to overpower the other individual that has the awareness of his negative emotions. But because that person with the inflated ego does not have the awareness, is constantly trying to overpower, right, through manipulation and through projection, others. That's when you see, that's what you call, that's what you can identify as narcissistic traits or a narcissistic person. Okay. So I feel that it is important because us, let's say African people or people from African backgrounds, we were taught not to deal with emotions, period. Right? Growing up, if you were to, yes, you could have expressed joy. You could have expressed having a thrill. You could have expressed. So the way in which you grew up is going to be indicative as to how you have the awareness about your shadow, the aspect of your shadow that holds those emotions that were probably forbidden in your childhood as you were growing up. So when I say, go back into your childhood and look at these things, it is also indicative that we need to deal with these negative emotions, especially a lot of people, a lot of generations had not had the chance to even have the awareness that negative emotions are legitimate, are valid, and they need to be dealt with. So they grow up, thinking that negative emotions are bad. They need to be put away. And then the ego steps in, always in denial and always trying to be right. So there's a lot of narcissistic traits when it comes to, how us, people of African descent, deal with negative emotions. That is why it is healthy to talk about it and have spaces to actually to actually, you know, just vent and speak on these topics. Another, I also want to say another repercussion of not dealing with emotions or dealing with negative emotions is you're going to find functioning adults that just don't want to engage when it comes to emotions at all, whether good or bad, right? You're going to see them highly intelligent, right? They're always going to be busy, whether it's busy going to school, getting a master's degree, getting a PhD, studying, constantly studying, or constantly working. That's, you know, we can say those people are highly functional, but they are highly separated from their shadow aspect because they have not had the awareness that emotions were just normal and legitimate and that they needed to be dealt with. So you will find a high percentage of adults, you know, in our, you know, in the African descent nation or African descent group of people, where you will find a lot of, you know, highly intelligent people that are constantly occupying their mind because the moment they have a chance or the moment they get the opportunity, because life will throw at you opportunities for you to realize that you have not dealt with emotions, and more so negative emotions. So that was the video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, I am going to do another video, probably a live, but not today. Maybe throughout this week or next week, pertaining to, you know, different aspects of ourselves. Right? I did speak briefly about the shadow self in this video and the ego briefly, but we need to acknowledge that we are a vessel of many resources. And when you acknowledge that, you know, if you look at a vessel, let's say per instance, Star Trek has a big vessel. They're not alone in there. You just don't have one captain. You have a whole team of, you know, I want to say, you know, the crew, right? Everybody's going to have a role to maintain that vessel. And so in the next video, I'm going to talk about, you know, how in our vessel, because we are a vessel, not just a body, we are a vessel comprised of many functions, many resources. And so we have a whole crew of I want to say archetype or roles that are functional within ourselves, and that we need to make space, because the captain is not just our ego, the identity that we present to the world, right? Just like Captain, what's his name? Captain Kirk? I think it's Captain Kirk. Just like Captain Kirk, he is not by himself. When he needs to make a decision, he addresses other people in his crew to take the best decision for the vessel to move on forward. The same is applicable with our human vessel, right? We have the ego self who's at the forefront, who's going to take proper decision as to where we're going to take this vessel, how this vessel is going to function. But we're not alone in this ship. We have a whole crew, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next video. Okay, you guys, I want to say take care of your minds, your hearts, and your entire being. And until next time, peace.